So this is an analysis of the Gun by Vicki Feaver. I do like this poem. I'm not really sure why, but I think it's that I really like the vivid images in it. Now, like many of these modern poems of the decade, there's very little figurative language in the poem, but there are images. And if you get an unseen poem like this and you think, oh my gosh, what am I going to do, because there's no similes and there's very few metaphors and so on, imagine that the poet has given you a collection of photographs. Instead of thinking about what words they've given you, think about what photographs they've handed you, what images have they put in your head, and then think about how those images connect to the human condition. So the title alone of the gun obviously has a significance. A gun is a phallic symbol, always in literature, and often a symbol of masculinity in general. It's a symbol of violence and death, because essentially that's what guns are designed for. So the title is significant. And let's have a look at the first stanza, because that stands out. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stanzas. It's written in free verse, so the metre can't really help us other than to think about the fact that there is a freedom and independence to the thoughts in the poem. And the first stanza, as I said, really stands out because it's 2 lines, but it's a split line. So bringing a gun into the house changes it. So first of all, you've got a certain amount of ambiguity there. Changes what? Does it change the gun? Does it change the house? And you've immediately got 2 settings set up there. You've got the domestic, haven't you? And the outside, which is associated with the gun and hunting. And there's a suggestion that bringing a gun into the house changes the house, and then of course the people with it. So part of what this poem has to say to the human condition is related to the relationship between humans and guns, and the ritual surrounding that, I think. She then moves into direct address. You lay on the kitchen table, but she's not talking to the reader. She's talking to her partner. So there's another character in the poem that the poetic voice is addressing. And we're assuming that that partner is male because, as we have said, the gun is a phallic symbol. You lay on the kitchen table, stretched out like something dead itself. So first of all, there's a sense that the gun exerts power because it's placed in the central part of domesticity. It's laid across the kitchen table, and if you look a bit further down, it doesn't even fit on the table, so it's kind of stretched over it, taking control over it. And we do have a simile here, stretched out like something dead itself. So again, we've got that enjambment there. So it's as if the gun is a dead thing. It represents death in that simile. But the split line there kind of gives a bit of hesitation, doesn't it, of is it dead or is it going to cause death? The grainy polished wood stock jutting over the edge. So again, it doesn't fit on the table, so it's immense in its sort of scope and power. The long metal barrow casting a grey shadow on the green check cloth. And look at the contrast there. So she's emphasising the gun's metallic qualities because she literally calls it long metal barrel. Casting, you can cast a shadow, but you can talk about casting metal, can't you, when you mould metal into something? So she's reinforcing how grey and metallic the gun is. And then you've got this really almost kitsch image of a green checked tablecloth that the gun is in contrast to. So at first, the gun seems very much at odds with her domestic life. Then moving on into the third stanza, at first it's just practice. And then we've got a stop, an end stop there. So does the gun stop things happening? Does the practice stop there? Performing tins, dangling an orange string from trees in the garden. And notice how you've got the assonance of the I sound, in string, which makes it sound sort of tinny and harmless. It's replicating the sound that a gun might make, but in quite a gentle way. And at this point it's still outside the house, so it's from dangling from trees in the garden, the things that they're shooting at, so it's kept outside. End stop again. Then a rabbit shot clean through the head. So notice these kind of discourse markers here: at first, then, soon. So she's talking about how the gun makes changes through the passage of time. And after this end stop, you get this really shocking image. We've gone from green checkcloths and trees in the garden to a rabbit shot clean through the head. So the gun is violent, and that happens quickly, and that happens in quite a surprising way. And at this point, there is a sense that she is still separate from the gun because this is happening outside. And notice the monosyllabic quality here, shot clean through the head. There's a simplicity to this violence, a kind of earthiness to it, which is shocking. And then we've got this discourse marker. Soon, the fridge fills with creatures that have run and flown. So she talks about the fact that they are now hunting with this gun, or her husband is. But she can't say it directly. It's euphemistic, isn't it? So the fridge magically fills up with creatures that have run and flown. And what she actually means is that her fridge is full of the dead bodies of animals that he has shot. But she doesn't actually say that. It sounds like they've kind of crawled into the fridge. So again, she's moderating still at this point the impact of the gun. Your hands reek of gun oil and entrails. And notice you've got an end stop here before she will admit that what he actually stinks of, reek means stinks. He smells of animal guts, entrails. So at this point, she's still suggesting that he is the hunter rather than her. And your hands reek. So it's not smell of, they reek. It's kind of embedded in him. If you reek of something, it's a scent that you can't get off you. And she's hesitant, as I said before, she'll admit that it's blood and guts that he actually smells with. You trample fur and feathers. Then you've got a repeated kind of consonance here of F sounds all the way through. So we've got fridge, fills, flown, fur, feathers. And then later on we'll come to the word fresh. I would argue that the F sound there mitigates the violence of the gun. To mitigate something means to make it less. Because it's literally a kind of fluffy, soft sound. Sorry, violence. Trying to talk and write doesn't work. All right, cross it out. Try again. Violence of the gun. So it mitigates the violence of the gun through its gentle sound. It's almost like she's now trying to make excuses for her partner, and here's why. Because although he is trampling fur and feathers, there's a spring in your step. Your eyes gleam like when sex was fresh. So she tells us that he's walking in a more jaunty, cheerful way, and your eyes gleam like when sex was fresh. Notice that all of this is starting to be in the present tense. It's really immediate and really vivacious, kind of full of life. It's happening now. So the introduction of the gun to their family has actually given them a bit more life, as it were. And then she uses a metaphor to say that your eyes gleam like when sex was fresh. So it's a simile, sorry, not a metaphor. And she's saying that it's like when we first met each other and sex was still exciting. So we now find out perhaps that they've been together for a long time, and the gun is bringing something back to their relationship that had been missing. She's also equating, let me move this up for you so you can see. She's equating death and sex, isn't she? So she's seeing a link, which you get a lot in literature, between death and sex. And then at the first line of this last stanza, a gun brings a house alive. So she compounds this idea that in her mind there is a connection between death and sex. And then suddenly I join in the cooking, jointing, slicing, stirring and tasting. So you've got that kind of multiple present tense verbs. And she is now participating in what the gun has done. She does the cooking, the jointing, so that means she's literally taking the bones apart, slicing, stirring and tasting. She's now an equal partner and she's finding it exciting. The present tense verbs suggest excitement. And then the poem ends with this extraordinary image. Excited as if the king death had arrived to feast, stalking out of winter's woods, his black mouth sprouting golden crocuses. So in a poem that's been quite literal and quite down to earth, if you like, in that you can imagine this kitchen with a gun on a table and a couple kind of shooting animals living in a rural location, suddenly you've got this extended metaphor. And she's making reference to a mythical creature, something called the King of Death. I think it's a reference to English kind of folk characters like the Green Man. And the King of Death stalks through the woods, but while he's walking through wintry woods, his mouth, he's kind of vomiting out golden crocuses. And crocuses are really pretty little flowers, and they're often the first flower of spring. So this figure, like the Green Man in English folklore, is a metaphor for the continuance of life. So as things are dying, things are coming back to life. So she's kind of come to terms with the gun. She sees that through the gun providing them with food, it's actually providing life. She's seeing that although the gun does kill things, it doesn't actually wipe life out altogether. And in her opinion, we may not agree, but in her opinion, it's actually part of the circle of life. And look at the contrast here in the colour, because you've got a black mouth and golden crocuses, you know, again, which is a metaphor for the contrast in which she sees in the death that the gun brings, but also the life that it brings. So I do particularly like this poem because of the combination of really literal images, you know, and lots of sensory image, isn't there? What you smell of, what you can see, what you can hear, but then also this extraordinary metaphorical image at the end of the poem, which really surprises you as a reader. And I think that's something, you know, you can talk about if you're evaluating poems, moments that surprise the reader. You probably get to the end of this poem and you're expecting her to describe the feast that they might have out of the food that they've prepared, but she describes a king of death, this wonderful metaphorical creature coming to the feast instead. So it's lovely when a poet surprises you.